Hi everyone. In this video, I'll be discussing some of the primary themes that I want you to keep your eye out for as you read through a small selection of Shakespeare's sonnets. So, one of the first things I want you to be thinking about is the way that the sonnet tradition evolves throughout time in England. Remember that some of the first sonneteers in England were writing in the early 16th century, yet this fad persists and continues in England until well into the 17th century. But it doesn't persist unchanged. As this fad continues, sonneteers become interested in kind of evolving or innovating the tradition and changing how sonnets work. So one question I want you to be thinking about as you read through Shakespeare's sonnets is, as the sonnet tradition persists across the 16th and 17th centuries, how do writers begin to innovate the form? We know from last week, for example, that Philip Sidney in his Astrophil and Stella often directed his sonnets toward the process of writing, the difficulties of writing at all, in addition to talking about love. We also saw Elizabeth I addressing not just love, but also her political rivals in the sonnet form. Both of these authors kind of use the sonnet, which is normally for love, and they kind of position it in a different way. They appropriate it for different purposes. And so Shakespeare follows both of these writers. And so now I want you to be thinking about, how does Shakespeare begin to appropriate the sonnet tradition for his own purposes? All right, one theme that recurs throughout Shakespeare's sonnets is that of death and mortality. Here's an example from one of his sonnets that was written to the young man, perhaps Henry Wriothesley. I'm reading from these original images from that original publication of Shakespeare's sonnets, just so we can have some practice looking at early modern type and typeface. So I'll start at the beginning. That time of year thou mayst in me behold, when yellow leaves, or none, or few do hang upon those boughs which shake against the cold. We already noticed in that second line, for example, this use of polysyndeton. So if you had your eagle eyes out, you may have seen that. You'll also hear in these first three lines Shakespeare describing the process of aging through the metaphor of a tree, in which he is an aging tree in fall with yellow leaves that are falling off the branches. This is the theme that Shakespeare meditates on over and over again in his poetry. The process of aging, the process of becoming old, and the ultimate cost of mortality, meaning the kind of erasure of death that it presents. At the same time, as he's dwelling on death and mortality, he also tries to offer solutions of immortality that allow him and others opportunities to keep living. So this poem, Sonnet 12, also addressed to the young man, has very similar themes to Sonnet 73 from earlier. So if we start at the beginning, when I do count the clock that tells the time, and see the brave day sunk in hideous night, when I behold the violet past prime, and sable curls or silvered o'er with white, when lofty trees I see barren of leaves, which erst from heat did canopy the herd, and summer's green, all girded up in sheaves, borne on the bier with white and bristly beard, then of thy beauty do I question make, that thou among the wastes of time must go. You hear him really processing the fact that everyone dies. Since sweets and beauties do themselves forsake, and die as fast as they see others grow, and nothing 'gainst time's scythe can make defense, save breed to brave him when he takes thee hence. So throughout this entire sonnet, Shakespeare is vividly depicting the process of aging, again, through numerous metaphors that involve, trees losing leaves, a clock that is just kind of ticking away the minutes, summer's green, all girded up in like bales of hay. He's really meditating almost primarily on death until the very last line. And I really need this bar to go away so I can show us that line. Save, breed, meaning save, have sex, and have children. For him, that's the only thing you can do against this kind of slow deterioration that mortality and death present. Breed, that's the only thing you can do, according to this sonnet. So that's one way he takes on this theme of death and immortality. He also focuses on, we could almost call it meta poetry, poems that also seem to be about poems and how one writes a poem. So in this very famous sonnet of Shakespeare's, for example, Again, written to a young man. I just always want to emphasize that because it's very easy for people to forget. The first line says, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" And that question really tells us all we need to know about how this poem is about poetry. Because rather than just going out and saying, "You are like a summer's day," or "You're nothing like a summer's day," Shakespeare poses the question, or to follow my own rules from earlier, the speaker poses the question, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" Should I do it? Does that make sense? Is that a good comparison? Throughout the rest of this sonnet, the speaker evaluates that claim. Can I compare you to a summer's day? Is that a good idea? And ultimately comes to the conclusion that that's a terrible comparison, that summer is actually pretty awful. It's hot, it's windy, it's very short, and it's uncomfortable. He says that's not a really good comparison for you, who are much more beautiful and much more constant than the ever-changing summer. And in the final line, we see another recipe for immortality. "So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee." There are a lot of ways we could define what that "this" refers to. It's an example of deixis in which we do not have a clear referent for the "this." What is the "this"? Many people think this is the poem. So as long as this poem lives, it gives life to thee. That's another solution Shakespeare presents for the problem of death and mortality, is immortality through poetry. Now, you remember last week when we talked about the blason, the form of cataloging a woman's beauty through describing each part of her body. In Sonnet 130, Shakespeare takes the opposite approach. You might hear it in the first line. "My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun." Instead of saying, "Oh, my mistress's eyes are just like the sun," he says they're nothing like the sun. And he keeps going throughout this poem to say, all of these blasonic comparisons are stupid. They don't make any sense. So I would love to hear your thoughts on how Shakespeare presents the contrablason, or the opposite of a blason. And then finally, Shakespeare presents kind of complicated feelings toward his two love interests, the young man and the female beloved, which comes to the fore in Sonnet 144. "Two loves I have of comfort and despair, which like two spirits do suggest me still. The better angel is a man right fair, the worser spirit a woman colored ill. To win me soon to hell, my female evil tempteth my better angel from my sight." All right. We see in this sonnet, Shakespeare seems to be either addressing a love triangle between himself, the young man, and the woman, or asserts that somehow the woman is corrupting his young man that he's in love with. So we see his two loves coming into tension here in this sonnet that highlights his ambivalent feelings towards the two different love interests he finds within this larger sonnet collection. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the way he treats his different love objects, I suppose you could say, in these sonnets, the young man or the female beloved. All right, those are the themes I have for this week. I'm really looking forward to reading your discussion posts, and I'm especially excited to watch your sonnet recitation videos. I cannot wait to see what you have in store. See you soon.